And of course, our top focus this morning, rising costs, stubborn inflation and soaring taxes. India's middle class is feeling the pinch like never before. As Budget 2025 looms, the nation's backbone demands an overhaul to ease their financial burdens. Here's our comprehensive report on their wish list. Take a look.
With the countdown to Budget 2025 underway, all eyes are on potential tax reforms that could ease the financial strain on India's middle class. Often hailed as the backbone of the economy, this segment has borne the brunt of rising costs and limited income growth, all while shouldering increasing tax burdens. Despite steady inflation eroding disposable incomes, taxes have remained stubbornly high. Essential expenses like healthcare, education and housing have skyrocketed, leaving families with little room to save or invest. The salaried class now awaits an overhaul in tax structures, one that simplifies the system and brings meaningful relief. Proposals for increased exemptions, higher standard deductions and streamlined processes are topping their wish list. Affordable housing is another crucial concern. The dream of owning a home feels increasingly out of reach due to escalating property prices and hefty loan interest rates. The middle class hopes for targeted measures such as subsidies for first-time buyers or reduction in stamp duty to make this aspiration attainable. Inflation, meanwhile, continues to chip away at household budgets. Stabilizing fuel and utility prices alongside subsidies on essential commodities could significantly ease monthly financial pressures. Additionally, long-term stability hinges on policies promoting job creation, skill development and upskilling to meet the demands of a rapidly evolving economy. Retirement planning and healthcare provisions are also high on the agenda. The middle class seeks reforms that cater to contemporary work-life dynamics, such as tax deductions for remote work expenses or allowances for ongoing education. As anticipation builds, the big question remains, will Budget 2025 deliver the much-needed respite for the middle class? All will be revealed on February 1st. But one thing is clear, the middle class deserves its moment in the spotlight. Business Bureau, WION, World is One.
And for more on this, we're now joined by Amrish Baliga, independent market analyst, live from Mumbai. Thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Baliga, I want to ask you, of course, about the expectations and the overall outlook. But before that, there are some questions which are tailored for perhaps some of our younger viewers who are just beginning their financial literacy journey. I came across this statement that you'd made earlier saying that it wouldn't be surprising if the RBI goes for a larger 50 BPS cut in February. Of course, this follows the RBI's recent liquidity measures. If you had to explain that to some of our younger viewers, what would you say about its practical implications and the factors surrounding this?
See, the practical implication of this is that once the rates come down, borrowing becomes cheaper, and because of which we could have possibly more capex happening in the economy, especially on the private sector side. And that, again, boosts your consumption. And boosting of consumption clearly makes the economy perform better. And that's exactly what we are looking at.
Absolutely, Mr. Baliga. And that being said, how do you see the stock market reacting to the upcoming budget?
Typically, see, whenever we have a good rally before the budget, the risks based on expectations, in fact, rise. However, this time we have seen a major correction. But last 4 days, we have seen a very decent bounce back from lower levels, about a 700-point rally on the Nifty. So the risk at the current levels is that of a lackluster budget, where there's nothing much for the markets to cheer about, basically from the market's perspective. But on the other hand, just like what you're talking a while back, for example, if there are lower tax slabs or tax stops for the middle class and the salaried class, this could spur consumption going ahead, and that will be taken positively. Similarly, if higher spends are announced on infra, railways and defense, which again I expect, I think that would be positive but again, execution is the key out there. Like last year also, we had extremely good numbers, but the execution had not happened. then if new PLI schemes are announced for manufacturing or there's a special focus on China plus one sector, again, looking at the 10% tariffs imposed by US on China, I think that would be positive for those sectors. Overall, fiscal prudence clearly is expected to be followed because we have done that in the last so many years. Also expected is a focus on export-oriented sectors, looking at the sort of weakness in the rupee in the last month and a half, 2 months. And we have been talking of Viksit Bharat, which is a developed nation by 2047, for which the economic survey has indicated that the Indian economy needs to grow at 8% over the next decade. Whereas we are now expected to grow at 6.4 to 6.8% as indicated in the survey, which is much lower. So we need to see what measures the finance minister takes to put India on the high growth trajectory. And generally, whenever such measures are taken for long-term gain, there is normally a short-term pain, which again the markets don't like. So I think we need to see as to what finally happens.
Absolutely. And if the finance minister does announce strong growth-oriented measures while maintaining fiscal discipline, how do you expect the markets to, of course, react in the short term as well as the long term?
See, I mean, unless it's a path-breaking budget, which I don't expect, we have seen that the budget's impact on the market is short-term. It doesn't really last beyond 2 or 3 days, whether it's positive or negative. So if the budget is decent from a market perspective, we could see a bounce. But again, that I mean, the sort of a bounce which you've seen in the last 3 4 days will actually continue for another 2 or 3 days. But then we'll again get back into the correction mode, which we've been witnessing for the last 4 months.
Right, and I also wanted to get your views on this. Do you think at this point we're looking at sort of a inflation versus growth balance debate going into the budget?
Yeah, it would be there, no doubt. But then I think the concentration would be more on growth than inflation. Because, like I said, I mean, if we have to grow at 8%, we can't afford not to have a growth-oriented budget.
Now, of course, you said that you don't expect it to be path-breaking. That being said, I have to ask, how do you see this budget balancing these two priorities, if it will at all?
No, I mean, like I said, the concentration would be more on growth vis-a-vis inflation, because they may possibly want to leave that to the RBI to handle, whereas the finance minister will concentrate more on growth.
All right, and which sectors do you believe would benefit the most from the budget which is focused on economic growth? Which ones could face challenges in that regard?
See, I mean, I would say that manufacturing would be one of the focus areas because Make in India still is focused for the government. And looking at the way the rupee is, we have to play that China plus one and the other export-oriented sectors. So I think something like specialty chemicals, I think, would be one of those focus areas. And defense, again, not from just domestic, but from the view of exports of defense. I think that should play out well.
Right. And given India's fiscal position, Mr. Baliga, and RBI's liquidity measures, like we were discussing earlier, how do you see global investors reacting to perhaps the upcoming budget?
I don't think, I mean, unless it's a path-breaking one, I really don't see any change in the way the foreign investors will be looking at India, at least in the short to medium term. Because as long as the rupee is depreciating and US continues to do well, when I say US, I'm talking of US markets continue to do well, I really don't see a huge flow into India, I mean, at least for the next 2 quarters.
All right, Mr. Baliga, thank you so much for joining us on the show with your insights on this. Of course, in a few hours from now, we'll know exactly how this pans out. Thank you so much for joining us for now. All right, for the latest updates, we're also now being joined by correspondent Dharamjot Kaur from Vijay Chowk. Dharamjot, thank you so much for joining us. We were just talking to Mr. Amrish Baliga. I know you've been covering all the updates from ground for us. Dharamjot, what is the overall outlook and the expectations?
Well, Liam, I have to point out it's a very foggy, crisp winter morning. Visibility isn't that great, which might say something about the mood also ahead of the budget. I mean, there is uncertainty with respect to what kind of announcements are expected at 11 a.m., which is roughly less than 3 hours from now when the finance minister will be presenting the budget. as analysts in the past few days have been correctly mentioning, there is a lot of hope among India's middle class that they will find at least respite on two fronts. One, in terms of the tax slabs, there will be a raise in the basic exemption limit, and that the tabs might be relaxed. The tax slabs might be relaxed a little bit. On the second front, the middle class and the common man is also hoping that the taxation filing process will be simplified further. There's this ongoing debate since the past year about the old tax regime versus the new tax regime. How much of that is further simplified in the upcoming budget? That is something that we'll be on the lookout for. So the crux of the matter here essentially is this: how much more money can the common man expect in his pockets in the next few hours? That will be the biggest point of concern, which in return will also have a trickle-down effect and an impact on other factors with respect to basic spending, with respect to how much can retail investors afford to put more money in terms of short-term and long-term investments. So the bottom line is that what can the finance minister do to relieve the middle class and give it more disposable income, given how geopolitical tensions, how domestic inflation has been affecting the common man's pocket here.
All right. Well, Dharamjot, thank you for mentioning what the weather is like and how that might be a sign of what's to come. I'm sure a lot of our viewers would not appreciate that premonition, but I do. That being said, we were talking about the economic survey as well, the gap in vocational education that economic survey has highlighted. That's a significant area. What can you tell us about that, Dharamjot?
Well, the survey did point out that there is, the numbers are looking better with respect to the dropout rates from basic education and schooling reducing. But again, retention of young children in the education system is still a cause for concern. Vocational education also, the country has been on a path of introducing several schemes to ensure that training, industrial training, cooperative sector training, basic education in the rural sector, in tier 2, tier 3 cities, all of these become more and more reachable for people in these particular areas. But of course, there is still there's more expected to be done in that sector, Haim. There are still certain areas where education is still not as the infrastructure is still not what it needs to be. We're still seeing positive numbers with respect to at least the women's sector in terms of their involvement in education, in the labor force, in active employment. But is there room for improvement? Yes. Will that happen in this budget? Again, that's the big question. We'll probably find out in a couple of hours.
Absolutely, Dharamjot. All will be clear in a few hours from now. I also want to talk about Prime Minister Modi's address ahead of the economic survey yesterday. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of speculation as to if he hinted at a possible income tax relief for the middle class, because he didn't mention that I pray that Goddess Lakshmi showers the poor middle class with blessings. What do you have to say about that?
Well, Haim, that is no doubt been the topic of debate and discussion since the Prime Minister's address yesterday. It could mean two things. One, it could be a positive hint that yes, the goddess via the budget will be showering some blessings and relief for the middle class. Or, on the other hand, it could mean that, well, it's up to divine forces now to make circumstances better for the middle class. Which way this really pans out again, it's been a topic of discussion, and there is hope. There's cautious optimism. That's the term that I've been using since yesterday. There's optimism, but it's cautious, it's calculated. Will that really translate into a celebratory announcement in the budget for the middle class, for the common person? Again, big question on that. Hope is that it does. But it's again, an unanswered territory at the moment.
All right. Well, Dharamjot, thank you so much for bringing us the latest on this. Of course, all will be clear in a few hours from now. Cautious optimism, I've heard you. For that, we'll move on for now.
For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.